So for me, being able to stay mobile and move, but it really helps me feel, more connected to my environment. It helps me feel more connected to God. It helps me feel more connected to myself just by doing something as simple as going for a walk.
Most of us were taught just pop a pill, tough it out, or treat our bodies like they're just machines. But there is a different way. And you just heard a little something from my co-host for this season, Dr. Tyler McCurry. So hey, welcome to the How People Grow podcast season 3. I'm David Achata and I'm your host. As an author and someone who works with leaders, I've seen firsthand how disconnected we can get from our physical selves. And this is why this season is so important to me. It's all about the wisdom of the body. We're not just talking about mindset here. We're going way deeper, tapping into this ancient intelligence you've got within you. So forget that whole mind-body split. Dr. McCurry and I are going to walk you through how it's all connected. We're going to talk about our body's natural abilities to heal and share some really eye-opening stuff about trauma and how it affects us. So get ready for some real talk between Dr. McCurry and me, plus some of my own stories that'll help you understand what your body's been trying to tell you. So if you're ready to tune into that inner wisdom, I'm glad you're here. So join Dr. McCurry and I for this season, The Wisdom of the Body. It's time to go inward. We're back. It's the Tyler McCurry and David Achata show. And today we're going to talk about the body in motion and how movement is like medicine for us. And so I thought we'd jump in by talking about a book I read years ago. Tyler, did you ever read the book called A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson?
I did. Yeah, I did read that one.
Yeah, I listened to it many years ago. I might have been 25 years ago. I don't know, when I was in college. And, he walks the Appalachian Trail with a friend. It's a hilarious book. But there was a data point in there that I looked up and is still true today. And you might know this. Do you know how how far the average person in America walks in a week?
Oh man, in a week, I would guess maybe 10 miles.
You nailed it. It's actually 1.5 to 2 miles per day,
Yeah.
more or less, which goes to about 10 miles. And that includes around the grocery store, walk to your car, the walk to your car to drive down a couple blocks to the gym. But I wanted us to talk about this subject today because I think, in our country have a massive thinking problem.
Mm.
Eckhart Tolle, I think, calls it the disease of the mind, where we depend so much on our rationality and we
Mm.
forget the importance of the body. And for you, I know that this is your world. And so, walk us through a typical week with the types of people that you face, especially as it relates to issues related to not moving enough.
Oh man, I mean, probably the vast majority of people I deal with, it's something to do, some issue to do with not moving enough. Um, we think about chronic aches and pains, back pain, hip pain, neck pain, stuff like that, which of course is related to not moving, but even metabolic stuff like diabetes, um, high blood pressure, stuff like that is going to be affected by people not being active.
So people come in and they say something like, "Man, my shoulders are hurting. Can you help me feel better?" What does a conversation look like when you have to talk with them about how they're not active enough?
Yeah, so I usually talk to them about all the potential reasons why their shoulders may be hurting, and if we see that there is a lack of activity, um, typically I'll try to explain to them like, look, when we don't move. Actually, I've got one patient. The way that she said it, she said it's how her grandmother always told her. She said, "If you don't move, you rust." And I thought
That's
that was
good.
a great saying. It's absolutely true. If we don't move, um, our joints stiffen up, our muscles stiffen up. We lose blood flow to the muscles and the joints and things like that. So everything starts to lock up on us. And so if you're having a lot of chronic pain issues and you're not moving, the lack of movement feeds into the pain issues. And it becomes this
Mm.
vicious cycle that we have to break. The easiest way and the best way to break that is by getting you moving again.
Hmm. And why do you think it's so important that we as a people recover the importance of learning to move?
Um, there's a lot of bad things that happen when you don't move. They've come out fairly recently and they said people that are sedentary, um, they have just as much risk from different diseases like cancers and metabolic disorders and things like that as people that smoke do.
Wow.
Yeah, so moving is incredibly important. It keeps the joints lubricated, keeps the blood pumping through the body, which helps with hormones getting to where they need to go, and different things like that. So it can help with blood sugar regulation, blood pressure regulation. It helps with mental health. You get the endorphins from the exercise that makes you feel better. So it's incredibly important to move and be active.
Yeah, what happens in a person who maybe is struggling with stress or anxiety, chemically speaking, and what happens when they move in terms of the chemical changes in their bodies?
Yes, one thing that happens, and this is something that'll happen when we work on people using manual medicine. Um, it actually works on what's called the endocannabinoid system. So endo meaning inside of you, inside of the body, and cannabinoid being what it sounds like, cannabis. So
Okay.
it's your body's own kind of like cannabinoid or cannabis system. Um, it will stimulate that system so you get that feel good kind of high,
Hmm.
which is the same thing people get, like you hear about the runner's high. That's what's happening is they're actually triggering that endocannabinoid system to help them feel better. But then they get lowering of things like cortisol, which is a stress hormone. They have increases in serotonin, which is the feel good hormone. Those kinds of things. So the more active you are and the more you move, the more your body rewards you for it.
Hmm. I heard something recently. We were talking about me and you recently this morning, in fact. Um, it's this idea that we have stress chemicals and feel good chemicals, closeness chemicals that our minds produce based on our different states of activity or inactivity, states of being. And it's this idea that you can't have equal amounts of a stress chemical and a feel good chemical like dopamine or serotonin.
Yeah.
Um, why do you think it's important that we understand that?
I think we have to know that everything in the body is about balance. You can't have everything all at the same time. You can't be super stressed and completely relaxed all at the same time. You have to find that balance between the two. So, in one hand, if you're super stressed out and you have all the stress hormones that are high, like cortisol, that means your other hormones, like you mentioned, dopamine and serotonin, they're naturally going to be lower because your body's not producing as much of that to keep you going in whatever that stressful situation is. The converse is true where as you start to decrease your stress levels, the stress hormones are going to fall. Your body's not going to produce as much because it doesn't need it. It's not in that stressful environment. And it's going to start producing more of those feel good hormones, your dopamine and serotonin, to help you to rest and relax and recover. So
Hmm.
it's incredibly important to understand that the body is about balance. You can't just force it to do everything all at the same time. Eventually you're going to blow an engine if you're not careful and if you keep doing that.
Yeah, my big speech to my clients and people I work with is how health crowds out unhealth in many areas. Like healthy relationships, you just don't have time for the unhealthy ones.
Yeah,
If you're exercising and taking care of yourself, you just don't have the same amount of time for the other activities that aren't as healthy for you.
right.
And so it sounds like what we're kind of getting at here is that if we as people can learn to adopt behaviors and habits, then the healthier chemicals in many ways will crowd out the unhealthier one. Or I should say unhealthier. That the chemicals that make us feel more at peace
Right.
will crowd out the ones that make us feel more anxious. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that you said, not necessarily bad hormones
Yeah,
because they're
right.
not bad. They're there for a reason. We need them.
Yeah.
Um, Anyone who has a deficiency in cortisol from various conditions will tell you that they don't have any energy to go do anything, and so they have no drive. So all these things that are in our body, they're extremely useful. We just have to learn how to navigate using them to the full potential that we have.
Hmm. Yeah. So what do you say to somebody who says, Dr. McCurry, I don't have time to exercise or move like what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
My kids are in games, leagues. I work all the time. Um, what are some practical ways that people can, let's call it, move mindfully?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
I think a lot of doctors, it's their response when people say that is to just say, "Well, tough, you're an adult, just do it." Um, in reality, yeah, no, that doesn't work. We're all incredibly busy, especially living in America. We're all running around trying to get a whole bunch accomplished. So it's finding those in between moments to make the most use of those. What a lot of people don't realize is exercise and physical activity is actually cumulative. So when we say move for an hour a day, that means in an entire 24-hour period, we want you to move for an hour out of that.
Okay.
So, and to realize most people don't actually get to that point, um, says a lot about our culture and how immobile we are. But if you have those in between moments, we'll say that you're standing on the sideline at your kid's soccer game. Well, walk up and down the
Hmm.
sideline.
Hmm.
That's going to be activity that you can do. If you go to the grocery store, park further away.
Hmm.
That extra little bit of walking that you do is going to be beneficial. Um, it could be something as simple as set a timer on your watch while you're sitting at your deck or at your desk, um, and get up once an hour and maybe do like, I don't know, 5, 10 squats or something like that.
Hmm.
All of those things will add up over time and help you stay more active.
Yeah.
So it's all about using the time that you have. Even something I've heard, some people will tell you like during commercial breaks on TV to get up and walk in place. And that's, we think when we do something, when we do exercise, we have to do something, we have to go somewhere. We really don't. It's actually very simple. Even just walking in place is equivalent to going for a walk.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah. So in place,
Mhm.
there are these other practices we've talked about through the years, ways that we can be mindful with our movement. So, as an example, yoga,
Yeah.
tai chi. Tell us a little bit about how practices like yoga and tai chi can help us regulate our nervous system and reduce stress. But remember now, we're talking about people who are running and gunning. They're having a hard
Yeah.
time blocking off time because they're doing so many things. So, how can a normal person like that, a normal, quote, busy person, learn about yoga and Tai Chi and about how this can help them reduce stress, regulate the nervous system, etc. On the go. I mean, I know you got to sit still for a minute, but I mean, I'm saying you don't need a lot of time to do these things. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, yoga and Tai Chi are some of my favorites, especially Tai Chi, because you don't have to get down on the floor and, wallow around and all that stuff. Tai Chi is great because talking about standing up at your desk and doing a quick movement exercise, you can easily do that with Tai Chi. Um, what's good about both of those practices is it's trying to force you to really pay attention to your body and what it's doing in space. So you're going to actually help develop and build connections in the brain with things like proprioception and balance and stuff like that.
Mm,
Proprioception just means your body being able to tell where you're at in space relative to everything else around
mhm.
you. So you'll build up those things there. Um, they're also great exercises because they're weight bearing, so you're doing them against gravity. So it's going to help with bone density. So if you're someone who is older and there's not a lot of activities that you can do or you can't do weights, that actually will help strengthen the bones just because you're weight bearing while you're doing the activities.
Huh.
The other part of those two specifically is as you're doing them, it's kind of a nice, slow, controlled movement, and you're folding in breathing on top of it. Um, the regular breathing, the rhythmic breathing, will actually help balance and regulate your nervous system. So every time you breathe in, it stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, and every time you breathe out, it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. So by doing a physical activity that has you doing certain positions in a rhythmic way where you're rhythmically breathing along with it, you're balancing those two aspects of your nervous system.
How interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so question about this one. Um, I like what you said about breathing. I like what you said about intentional movement. Um, could you give us some examples of what are some simple practices people can integrate throughout their day that are maybe yoga, breathing, stretches, moves, tai chi, breathing, stretches, moves? Um, they're not watching you on a video, so with your words, can you describe what are some things people can do to keep themselves moving?
Yeah, I mean, so you can start the day even just before you get out of bed. You can start to stretch a little bit and just kind of get yourself going for the day. Think of like a little baby in a crib. Whenever it wakes up, the first thing it does, it just kind of stretches its arms and its legs and its head, just kind of stretches everything out. You can do those things yourself whenever you wake up in the mornings. And so even while you're laying in bed, you can maybe do some hip bridges or do where you pull your feet up to your butt and then you let your knees flop to one side and then the other. That's going to help start to mobilize the pelvis and help with some blood flow. And then, sitting up at the side of the bed, one of the exercises I really like is called a modified pigeon pose. So it's a yoga pose where one leg is bent at a 90 degree angle in front of you, and then the other leg is flat out behind you. That can be really difficult to do if you're not very flexible.
Sounds like it.
But sitting at the side of the bed, what it looks like is the one leg is bent in front of you and the other leg is down off the bed, bracing you
Mm-hmm.
against the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're just going to lean over that front leg and let it stretch your back and your glutes and your hamstrings and all of that. So already you've started stretching everything. You've started mobilizing some of these things before you've even gotten out of bed in the morning.
Mm.
So that's one thing that you can do to kind of get started. Um, while you're in the shower getting ready and you have the warm water running over you, it's a good time to maybe do some stretches. You can do some neck stretches where you lean the head side to side or tuck the chin or raise the chin and hold those stretches for a good 90 seconds or so to give the tissues a chance to reset themselves. Um, and then, just little times, like I said, throughout the day, you can do what we call habit stack. And so that's where if there's something that you're already doing, we'll say like brushing your teeth. If you know you're going to be brushing your teeth in the morning, habit stack that with something like walking in place. And
Okay.
so you're going to start adding more steps to your total step count for the day by already doing something you're used to already doing. You're adding that one little bit into it. And so if you do that through the whole rest of the day, that could be something like you're waiting at the grocery store, instead of getting angry that they're taking forever, use that as a chance to walk in place or do some stretches, do some deep breathing, those kinds of things.
Hmm. Is that how you behave at the grocery store?
Um, yeah, actually, I've gotten so used to it.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, actually, I do that quite a lot. Or like I'll do some mindful breathing when I'm driving. Um, it definitely does help with the road rage. Um, it makes long drives go by a little faster, those kinds of things.
Right.
So,
So great. I want to shift gears a little bit. These are a lot of great tips. I want to get to know you a little bit more with kind of this next section I wanted us to touch on, which is about movement as related to our spirituality.
yeah.
And you told me once that people have joked with you, they've called you the Appalachian shaman.
Yeah. Yeah. I add in a lot of non-traditional things whenever I'm seeing patients.
Uh-huh.
That could be anything from, osteopathic manipulation, acupuncture, to I've even done hypnosis and guided imagery and stuff like that.
Mm. Well, you told me that once, and I thought it was great because I've done some reading through the years about, various worldviews, and I have done some reading about shamanism, and I think the word shaman just means one who knows.
Hmm.
And at its core, it's really about helping people grow, helping people heal through natural means.
Right.
And you've told us a bit of your story, along the way about how you got into this from some of those football injuries. Um, but in your own experience, how has movement become a spiritual practice for you?
Movement is incredibly important for me. Um, One, I mean, I have so many injuries from all the years of football
Hmm.
that if I don't move regularly, things lock down so much and cause so much pain that I'm literally crippled in pain. I can't get up and move. I can't do anything. So that really, from a mental health perspective, takes its toll. With anxiety and depression and things like that. But from a spiritual perspective, that's where you're like, God, why are you doing this to me? Why am I feeling this way? Can't you do something to get me out of this? That kind of stuff. So, I think movement is actually very spiritual because, when we look at health, it's a combination of body, mind, and spirit. Um, and they all feed into one another. They all work together.
Hmm.
So, we use manipulation treatments a lot of times as a way to kind of break through into the mental and spiritual health aspect of our patients because there's not another way to get into it with them. Um, so for me, being able to stay mobile and move, um, not only does it help bolster my health in those three aspects, but it really helps me feel, more connected to my environment. It helps me feel more connected to God. It helps me feel more connected to myself,
Hmm.
um, just by doing something as simple as going for a walk.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I found that when I move in the morning through breathing or stretching, my body just feels so different as opposed to if I went to my phone and caught up on my social media or read the news or text messages or whatever. And so I want to tell you just a little bit about a practice that I've started. You're probably aware of these terms, I'm just learning them. But I want to tell you what they are, and then you describe what is happening in my body with these two different practices. Okay?
Okay.
So, scenario number one, I wake up, I jump out of bed, I go drink my coffee, which by the way is decaffeinated. And we can talk about that in a minute if you want. But
Heresy.
all right, for our listeners, you should know I cut out caffeine about a year and a half ago because I wanted to reduce cortisol output in my brain. And I'm not against coffee. It doesn't do the same thing to everybody, but for me, it was hyping me up too much. So I cut coffee, and but there was a time when I would drink 2 cups of caffeinated coffee and sit and read text messages, social media, news, or something like that. All right, that's scenario number one. Scenario number two, which is my current practice. I get up and I do 10 deep mindful breaths before I even get out of bed. So I'm sitting on the edge or I'm laying there. All right, so 10 deep belly breaths in through my nose, out through my mouth, letting my belly expand up and down. So that's step one in my routine. Step two is I go to the living room and I sit down and I do 3 sets of what I'm learning is called hypoxic breathing.
Mm.
And it's 2 in, like this, and 1 out. 2 in, 1 out. So kind of like this speed. And I do 30 to 50 of those. And I'm counting on my fingers how many I get through. So 30 to 50, that's 1 set. And then I do 3 sets.
Mm.
At the end of each set, I breathe in deep with my arms above my head, and I hold it for as long as I can. All right? Then I go down on my forehead, and I exhale by pulling my belly button into my spine. And I sit back up, and I hold that for as long as I can. All right? And then I take a deep breath, and I breathe out again. And then I go again for my next set. And I do that for another set. And then I repeat again. Big breath in, hold it, arms above my head. And then over on my forehead, breath out, pulling my belly up toward my spine. And I sit up and I hold that for as long as I can. So I do 3 of those. And then after that, I sit in the quiet for 5 to 10 minutes, breathing normally. So, and I can just tell you, I've learned this recently from a breathwork coach I'm spending time with, and she's been amazing for me. I no doubt feel very different.
Mm.
I'm way calmer. I'm way more aware of my thoughts and what's happening inside of me than the other way, which is where I do a cup of coffee or two, read something on my phone. So describe what's happening in the body with these 2 different practices.
Yeah, so the first one where you, jump out of bed, get the coffee, and read the news.
Mhm.
Immediately, what you're doing with the caffeine and really with the news, you're stimulating your sympathetic nervous system to kick in and be in gear. With that's going to come stimulatory neurotransmitters like norepinephrine, epinephrine, stuff like that. But then you're also going to get that stress hormone cortisol because it's trying to prepare you for the day to get you moving, get you going. So when you start out with the coffee and the news, that's what you're doing. You're automatically putting yourself in that fight or flight state.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
converse to that is if when you first wake up in the morning and you're doing some deep breathing, you're already working towards balancing the nervous system between the inhalation, the exhalation. You're working on balancing out the sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system. So instead of one or the other being too high or too low, you're creating a balance. When you start doing the quick breathing with the 2 in, 1 out, you're starting to slowly stimulate the sympathetic nervous system with the 2 breaths in, followed by 1 breath out.
Mhm.
What that's going to do is that'll kind of start waking you up. That's going to start getting the sympathetic nervous system going on its own without that sudden kick of the caffeine. Um, and then when you do the big deep breath in, where you pull your arms up and over your head,
Hmm.
the arms up over the head is actually the way the muscles attach. It's going to help pull open the rib cage, and it's going to help you fill your lungs more fully.
Okay.
So you're kind of offsetting the sympathetic kick with a nice big deep parasympathetic big breath in and then out.
Yeah.
Um, but you're allowing your lungs to actually fully expand. Um, and that way throughout the day you can get more deep breaths in naturally as opposed to shallow breathing like a lot of us do.
Hmm.
And then when you're breathing out and you're kind of leaning forward, pulling your belly button to your spine, that's kind of forcing the abdominals to tighten, which is going to help further push that air out of the lungs. So you don't have any trapped air
Hmm.
inside of the lung.
Hmm.
So that way, when you go to do the deep breaths, you have more room to breathe in.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've got two people now that you're going to hang out with at, let's say, 6:30 in the morning.
Mhm.
One has started their day with coffee and the news. The other has started their day with breathing practices and stretching, like something like what I'm describing. How do you think these two people are going to behave differently?
The one with the caffeine is definitely going to be a lot more amped up. They're going to be a lot more on edge, a lot more jittery. They may be more moody or irritable. Whereas the person who started with the breathing is going to be calmer, more relaxed, more balanced, not as irritable or moody as the other person.
Hmm. That's been my experience. I used to wake up the first way, and I got a lot of stuff done. I wasn't exactly a pleasure to live with, at that time in my life. But, to let our listeners in on a little bit of my history with Dr. McCurry, a couple years ago, I was having some pretty significant chest pain, which I'll talk about in a couple episodes from now. Actually, I think it's our next episode. And you were examining me, and I think I had a lung that was partially collapsed. Do you remember that?
But yeah, I do somewhat. I
Yeah.
don't think it was like collapse. It just wasn't feeling all the way.
Yeah. Do you think that is related to too many shallow breaths? Not enough deep
Oh
breathing?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So if you look at the way the lungs are laid out, um, what actually fills with air are what's called alveoli, and they look like clusters of grapes inside of the lung. So they're all these like hundreds of little air sacs. And when you breathe, those little air sacs will fill. Well, what'll happen is the ones that are closer to the pipe as the air's coming in, they fill first. The ones to the outside have to fill with whatever's left over. So if you're shallow breathing, those sacs, air sacs on the ends don't fill with air, and so they'll kind of start to crush down, and they'll kind of have more like a raisin appearance. Um, what can happen is that can actually cause scarring later in life because your body says, "Ah, we're not using those. Let's just get rid of them." So they'll start to kind of just die off, and you'll lose a lot of your ability to deep breathe and catch a full breath. Same things happen if you smoke. Those alveoli will start to die off. And
Hmm.
so if we shallow breathe, we're not filling up all those air sacs in the lungs. And that will, like I said, if you don't use it, you lose it.
Mm.
So,
So you telling me that our lungs, which are big air sacs,
mhm.
have within them little air sacs?
Oh, yeah.
I have
Yeah.
never heard this.
Yeah. If you look it up, they're called alveoli.
Wow, my mind just got blown. I feel like I need to go do a bunch of research and learn about this. Wow, okay. So I won't take us too far down that rabbit trail, but like let's go back to the lung that wasn't fully expanding. And I have
Yeah.
this theory I want to run by you and you see what you think about it. I've thought it for
Okay.
years. I've talked about it with theologians. I've never talked about it with a doctor. So in Greek and Hebrew, the words used for spirit
Hmm.
are also the same words as wind or breath. And I remember when I was a young theology student and I learned that, I was like so carried away with the beauty of the wind every time it would hit me. I'm like, wow, it's like reminding me of the Spirit of God or something.
Yeah.
And I've quoted this before, I believe, in this podcast, but I heard Eugene Peterson, the late Eugene Peterson, who helped translate The Message, which is a paraphrase of the Bible. And he was interviewed by Krista Tippett, and she asked him, what do you think of the word spiritual? And he said, I think it's cheap. Because he said it makes people think they can segment their lives.
Yeah.
He said, we're spiritual beings. It just means wind or breath, like what I just said. He said, and we're breathing all over everything all the time. And we have really kind of picked up this Platonic dualism I talked about a couple episodes ago about there's spiritual and there's physical. But that distinction doesn't exist in all cultures and has not existed in all of history. That's a unique thought that came from Plato. So if we were to assume that all of life is spiritual, which I believe it is, what you eat,
Mhm.
what you drink, what you watch, what you think, how you play, how you don't play, how you work, it's all an indicator of our spiritual life. And you have somebody like me, as an example, a couple of years ago, who's doing a lot of shallow breathing, and therefore one of their lungs is not fully expanding.
Mhm.
What do you think that says about the spiritual life of that person?
Man, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Looking at it as we're all spiritual beings and everything that we do is a spiritual process. If you're shallow breathing and you're not fully expanding your lungs, then you're not taking your spirit, if you're looking at it from a spiritual perspective, you're not taking your spirit to the fullest that it could be.
Mm-hmm.
You're not allowing enough of a expansion of your inner spirit to occur. Um, there's a reason we call it the breath of life, or you hear that phrase used a lot. Um, Breathing is so paramount that I think, as I mentioned in one of the other talks, it's one of the few functions that not only is automatic, but that we can also control.
Hmm. Right.
Um, like your heartbeat, like I said, it's automatic. It's going to do what it's going to do, and it's going to respond however it's going to respond, but you can't actively control it. Breathing, you can. So I think that's one reason, as a spiritual practice, breathing is so important, is that is one of the things that we can control. Um, and that can really have a profound impact on our bodies and our health, but definitely even our spirit as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're picking up what I was putting down without me explaining it fully. Because I've been walking around thinking about that for a couple of years. What does that say about at that time in my life, my spiritual life? And kind of the
Mhm.
way that I interpreted it, haven't made sense of it, is I wasn't receiving the fullness of, I think, what God had for me. I was stuck in a state of control and fear about certain
Yeah.
things. And of course, I can say that because I'm in my own skin. I can't say that related to anybody else out there who's doing a lot of shallow breathing. But it has been my big question mark for a couple of years is when we are not fully in our breath. Maybe I'll pose it more of a question to our readers or listeners. When we're not fully in our breath, what do you think that is saying about your spirit
Mhm.
or about your spiritual life? And I can't say what it is for you, but what I can say is for me, I think what that meant was I was stuck in a state of control and I was not receiving all that was there for me. But do you think that jives with the idea of a lung that's not fully expanding because there's been so much shallow breathing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely. I mean, we know that that's a cause of what. So atelectasis is the medical term for those alveoli not expanding fully and kind of staying and that scrunched down raisin like appearance. So we know that that's a cause of atelectasis is people not breathing deeply enough. We see it more from when someone's had an infection or something like that, or cancer or something that physically impairs it. But it's the same thing with people that just aren't breathing. They spend a lot of time shallow breathing, either through anxiety or, like you said, that control or whatever. Um, you'll get that same effect. You'll get that same disease process in the body if you don't do that.
Hmm.
So um, I think definitely from a spiritual perspective, if you think about, okay, what's going on spiritually that I'm not deep breathing and filling up my lungs, one, I'm going to say, well, you're probably rushing around too much.
Hmm.
You've got too much going on that you're not actually giving yourself a chance to sit back and breathe. So that's probably one thing that's going on. Another is you're letting anxiety probably control your life.
Hmm.
Um, I tell people one of the things that you notice in poker, one of the biggest tells for people is they hold their breath. And that's
Ah.
because they're excited or they're anxious or then they're like, and they're not breathing. Um, if you spend a lot of your time in an anxious state, you're going to be holding your breath or you're going to be kind of panting like a dog
Hmm.
and you're going to shallow breathe and you're not going to fully expand those lungs. So spiritually, that's going to have an impact on you where you're going to lose that feeling of connectedness. You're going to lose that feeling of purpose and those kinds of things. And yeah, they definitely can go hand in hand.
Mm. So maybe we could get really practical as we finish up this first episode, about ways that listeners can incorporate more movement into their daily lives, regardless of their fitness level. You've given us a couple of ideas. I would add fitness with fitness movement would be breathing and
Hmm.
movement. And I want to emphasize the reason I'm doing this whole series is I will just say it how it is. I'm sick of talking to people and hanging out with people and dealing with organizations that are stuck up in their heads.
Yeah.
There's less compassion, there's less empathy, less kindness. But when people actually understand they're not just a brain on legs, but they're a whole body, man, things get better. And so I'm
Yeah.
a big advocate for when I do sessions with groups, we move around, we have fun. In meetings, what I do is I say, all right, two of you go for a 10-minute walk, talk about the subject, and come back and then we'll talk about it. We don't do meetings where we sit in the room for an hour. We move around a lot. So I pair people up. I put them in tries. I put them in quads. I put them in groups of five, and they move. We tend to get better results that way in our meetings. So I think that we also need this in our lives too. And so as we come down the home stretch here, what could be some suggestions for people for incorporating more movement and breathing into their lives? And what do you see as the practical benefits that people could get from that?
I've already talked about ways to just kind of add it in throughout the day.
Hmm.
Um, I think the easiest way, or what I should say, the hardest thing for a lot of people is just knowing where to get started. Um, so practically, what I would say is pick one or two things that you know you're going to do whenever you have one of those moments, and start doing that. So that could be something as simple as, okay, whenever I have a little bit of downtime or whenever I think about it, I'm going to do 5 deep breaths in and out, or I'm going to get up and I'm going to walk in place. Have a plan in place for whenever those things come around. And then just start doing it. And as you're doing those things and you realize, hey, this is becoming a lot easier, then start adding more stuff to it. Um, if you want to go for a longer walk, if you want to start doing some high knees or something like that while you're walking in place, start trying different types of breathing. Like the two and the one, like what you're talking about
Hmm.
doing. You can start playing around with it once you build that habit and you started doing it. But that would probably be the most practical thing I would say is pick one or two ways that you know you're going to do whenever you have those breaks, and just stick with those and do those to start out.
And what do you think the simple benefits are that people can begin to look for as they make that a practice?
The simple benefits. So for walking, you're probably going to notice several things. One, you're going to notice, tightening up of the muscles. You're going to feel a little more stable structurally. Um, you're probably going to notice that one, you're breathing a little easier. Maybe you have a little more energy, those kinds of things. With the breathing, one, you're definitely going to notice you're breathing easier. You'll probably notice whenever there's a stressful situation that you're not doing that panting or the quick in and out breaths like you normally would do, because you're more used to actually expanding your lungs and getting a full breath in. So those are some of the immediate things that I think people would notice.
It's great. Thank you. Well, for our listeners, thanks for being here for this episode. We're going to go and finish up and come back next week, okay? The next conversation we're going to have is about more, it's actually deeper on the subject I touched on here, the body's connection to spirit. So integrating the mind, body, and the soul. And what we're going to talk about is the interconnectedness of it all, and how if we live a life where all this is connected, our capacity to heal and live a life of well-being drastically increases. So that's what we're going to talk about next time. Until then, we'll see you. Thanks for being here, Tyler.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, thanks again to Dr. McCurry for a great interview. If this podcast has been helpful to you, I want to invite you to go over to patreon.com/howpeoplegrow and support us. You can get in for a really small amount, $9 a month, and that gets you a monthly Zoom conversation with the community. And we just discuss some of the content in the cast, and it's a fun way to get to know some people. The other one is called Serious Intention. That's the second tier. It's more expensive. It's $199 a month. But with that, you get the monthly Zoom conversation. You also get quarterly coaching, and you get a yearly retreat with me. So go check that out for more information. If you have more questions, contact me. You can do that at david@davidachata.com. Also, I want to draw your attention to something I mentioned in the last episode. And it's that this summer we're forming up a new cohort with something I created called the Leadership Renewal Div. And that goes through 4 disciplines to be steady, to be grounded. And it's a 3-month cohort with designed for 2 to 4 people. So go to achatacoaching.com, and right there on that you'll see a coaching cohort tab. You can click that and sign up there. And that content is super awesome. It was actually featured on Inc.com. There's a link in the page there if you want to learn about that. So I'm really proud of that. All right, that's it for today. We look forward to seeing you at our next podcast episode. Until then, peace.